Without further ado, we spoke with Patricia Calhoun this morning. Welcome back. He is, I think, one of the all-time great print investigative reporters. He is the absolute go-to guy on anything that happened at Columbine. He teaches this business, and if they were all like him, our business would be better off. From journalism, Alan Prendergast is our guest. Jean Bonnet's parents on indictment became an exoneration. Alan, good morning.
Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. We just spoke with Patricia this morning, and we were talking about your story, and now I've had a chance to read it. So first of all, a little bit about your background. I mean, I've known this man for, I don't know, what do you think, 30 years or something?
Close to it, yeah. I think it'll be 30 years next year, actually.
Wow.
I think that's when I first met you and wrote a piece about you for Westward.
And I'll tell you, this guy is on the money, on the job, and when it came to what happened at Columbine and so many things, he has just been, I think, the man. And now it comes to this one. And I remember at the time you would go in and out of writing about the Ramseys, but I
was never one of the guys doing the heavy lifting like, Charlie Brennan
sure.
or you. I was more of a reactor. I spent most of my energy on the Ramsey case has gone to trying to debunk media mythology rather than really dealing with the actual facts. And, particularly this whole Tracy fiasco with John Mark Carr. I mean, as you know very well, when you analyze how that all came about and the central role that Michael Tracy, who'd been making these documentaries, serving up any kind of alternative suspect he could find, basically, set up Carr and got the police interested in him and sort of did this weird undercover thing for months where he was essentially feeding Carr information.
It was grooming him.
His confession more.
It was grooming him like a pedophile grooms a kid.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, and going back through and looking at all of the false assertions in those documentaries and the things the Ramseys continue to maintain. I mean, if you go back and look at Michael Tracy's documentaries now, you'll find stuff that suggests, just how powerful this DNA evidence is.
And it's not.
And that was the point of doing this piece, was I thought what was interesting about the coverage is that everybody's saying, okay, these indictments are now out, but of course Mary Lacy cleared the parents in 2008. Mm-hmm. She did nothing of the kind.
No, that's right.
She may have said she cleared them.
Yeah, but
she used the term exoneration. Mm-hmm. But if you understand DNA evidence, or at least the rudiments of it, and I don't pretend to be an expert, but I think it's really a crime for any reporter to go out and say, well, the parents were cleared.
Yeah. No, and it's not. I mean, it is microscopic, is it not? I mean, this. I've spent hours listening to people talk, and I'm like you. I couldn't do science or math with a gun to my head, but this clearing that this idiot, she should be disbarred, Mary Tracy Lacy Keenan, whatever her name is now.
Well, I mean, trace DNA became this sort of fashionable term for what was essentially the ability to recover DNA from much more minuscule traces than they were able to do at the time this murder happened.
Yeah.
In other words, you go back to the evidence, and instead of looking for obvious stains, you'd get DNA from a blood stain or
a semen or whatever. Sure, of course, yeah, right.
You do scrapings where there's really no evident deposit of DNA, and you're going to come away with, in many cases, a few skin cells. We're talking really
microscopic stuff, right?
Yeah, and that they're now able to develop at least partial DNA markers off of that kind of material. Well, they went back to some of the clothing and other evidence in this case, and they came up with some partial traces of DNA, which was not in itself a big surprise. We already knew there was unidentified. I mean, even from the original DNA testing, we knew that there was some identified stuff in there. But there was always presumed, well, you can't really say anything about it one way or the other. I mean, there's always unexplained crud at any crime scene.
Sure.
You know this. I mean, I've been covering crimes for trials for 30 years. It's a classic defense tactic. If you find one shred of something on the site that the prosecution can't explain, you start to conjure an unknown alternate suspect out of it. It's like, well, there's a boot print, and it doesn't match anybody in the house, so it must not be my client.
But later we were able to, I say we, the people who are looking for the truth, they were able to explain that boot print.
Well, they were able to explain the blueprint. There's really plausible explanations for that. But also, with this DNA, I mean, the initial thinking was always, well, you can't really say it's not ejaculate. It's not something that you would tie to the crime scene specifically. It may have been in this underwear since it came out of the factory.
And it came out of China.
Yeah.
And remember, these were the underwear too big for her. She liked them because they had dates on them, and they were bought for, I believe, for her cousin initially. I'm tapping into my...
It was really a peculiar story.
Yeah,
if you really get into the story of this weird oversized underwear and what happened to the package, and how Lynn Wood turns it are Mary...
Please.
Years later.
Yeah. I mean, suddenly...
But the point was, all along, people thought, well, there are all sorts of possible explanations.
No.
So when she writes the letter and says, we have this trace DNA, and guess what? There's trace DNA in the leggings that matches what's in the underwear, and that shows there was some other party in there. This is where she's really being disingenuous.
And it's not true. I mean,
the problem is you don't know what kind of cross-contamination was going on. No. But what's more interesting, what she doesn't talk about and has never talked about, and may not even been aware of at the time she did this exoneration, is that there are so many different touch DNA samples in there that by her logic, there were 5 or 6 people involved.
Well, let's back this up. Alan Pendergast is with us. Peter Boyle, 710 KNUS. I think the blood is finally in the water. I think reasonable people now come to the conclusion that John and Patsy are directly involved in the murder of their daughter. What I think and again, from just reading and listening and hanging around it all these years, what these indictments mean is, like so many of us who lived that story, is that the grand jury, like law enforcement, couldn't really determine who did what at these crucial moments. So they both did. And I think I talked to somebody last night, Alan, who said maybe they were going to try an organized crime flip, like you do a Henry Hill or, Sammy the Bull Gravano, okay, Patsy, you have a whole life to live here. You got a son to raise.
Get them to work against each other.
Yeah, and exactly. And these idiots who wrote things in newspapers or said things on TV, wives are not allowed to testify against their husbands. That's nonsense. Battered women testify against their husbands all the time. You don't have to, but you can. Yeah. And if you made a deal, the cops should have separated them. We've been over this so many times. But John and Patsy Ramsey, in those, as you say, those 4 pages drafted by the Boulder grand jury, they did it. Now, we come down to this, and now as the wheels start to come off of people like, as you point out, Michael Tracy and Mary Keenan Lacey and Paula Woodward. By the way, has Paula written the book, The Best of Your Knowledge?
I don't think so, no.
Well, I've been told that she has written a book, and now I wonder, it's about the press and politics and everything around the Ramseys. As you know, she was in bed with them, and I can make a case that this goes back to the John Mark Carr story, that, as you know, 9 broke that story, and they were right there, that either Michael Tracy was feeding Paula Woodward and Channel 9, or Mary Keenan was feeding Channel 9 and Paula Woodward, or they both were, when they broke in 2006 that John Mark Carr story. And remember, Channel 9 got it first before anybody. And that was, I think, thank you very much for the laydown that Channel 9 and Paula Woodward had been doing for so long for people like Lynn Wood, for people like John and Patsy, for this horrible person, Michael Tracy, for this ridiculous woman, Mary Keenan Lacey. And so when it came down time for John Mark Carr, that was the gift. That was the thank you very much to Paula. And the story I've heard is that Paula's written a book, and I've heard it from a lot of people, that she interviewed people for this book. Now, she never called me, which, I'm shocked and appalled, but I know some other people she's talked to about a book. So
I don't know anything about it, but the issue of trading a certain kind of coverage for access has been part of this case from the beginning, and on the other extreme of that, you had these tabloid guys running around doing crazy things.
Yeah, but they were prosecuted. Patty and I were talking about it.
Well, some of them were prosecuted.
Yeah.
I'm not sure all of the most of this stuff that happened.
But the checkbook journalism that took place up in Boulder, one of those, we were talking about this earlier, the crack Boulder crime scene photographs were developed at the 1 hour photo guy, and he was tragic alcoholic, and he got drunk and sold the pictures to I think the Enquirer had them. And there was all these goofy stories of them trying to buy the ransom note and trying to bribe people. But for some reason, I find that far more reputable than the crap that Michael Tracy did and Mary Keenan Lacey did.
The interesting thing to me about the Tracy stuff all along was that while he was ranting about the lack of ethics, and he was particularly talking about the tabloid people, but he was acting,
and me, he was after
like
me.
He was acting like it was everybody other than him. He was doing things that are just so unforgivable from a journalistic standpoint in terms of accusing innocent people, dragging them into this thing, conjuring up this ninja intruder, and then blaming this guy who'd committed suicide. I mean, it was just crazy stuff.
It was horrible.
And there was never any real apology for any of this.
No, well, listen, he
confronted his co-producer about all this. Their response was, "Well, we did the right thing. We cleared those people by naming them as suspects, and then the Boulder police had to investigate them and decide they weren't anything."
He's like I said, I have no idea how. And
I think about just if we operated that way, just what life would be like. It's just you'd never get anywhere closer to any actual.
But he didn't want to. I mean,
and that to me is part of what the question we should be asking at this point is really how did this exoneration come about and why? And it's such an unusual thing to do, and it raised a lot of eyebrows when it first happened. But in light of this indictment, it really, really is disturbing to think about the degree to which the official charge with prosecuting the people responsible for this girl's death essentially just basically absolved folks who clearly were under the umbrella of suspicion for good reason.
Well, I mean, to me, it's been 17 years of sadness that these people literally danced away from the fire with help from some people that they're just, what did Dante say? There was a seat next to the fire in hell, and he went there, and what he saw scary it there. I think you'll see Patsy sitting there. I think you'll see, when their time comes and goes, I think you'll see those people we talked about, and they'll be sitting next to her. But they come back to DNA because it is microscopic, and there was DNA under her fingernails. That was a big deal. Well, none of that matches this other stuff.
Well, that's the point, is that you can say, okay, there's trace DNA, but which trace DNA do you want to focus on? Because anybody, I can take clothing fresh out of a package, and they did this in this case.
Well, they did. It's in China, right? Yeah.
And none of this stuff matches. So you either have to come up with half a dozen intruders, which is a clearly preposterous scenario, or you have to decide this is not ultimately clarification of anything.
It's meaningless.
I mean, if you found somebody down the line that matched this, great. But to sort of hang your hat on that and say, this is what's going to break the case, or the fact that there isn't any DNA from the Ramseys here, this proves they didn't do it. I mean, I just think that's really a reach. That's just.
I went and I, like I said, my memory now is giving me all these images and pictures, and I've been back reading notes. And when I got fired at Brand X, I lost a lot of my notes. But long story short, those underwear, little girls' underwear, they were manufactured in China in a PRC. Boulder sent a team to that factory. I don't know how much of that you knew, and to actually look.
Yeah.
And remember, I think the underwear came from New York from a trip they made, and her older cousin had them and wanted them, and whatever she wanted, she got. Believe me. And so she got the underwear. And by the way, she had her pants changed that night. I mean, Patsy redresses her.
Patsy acknowledges redressing her.
Well, but Patsy never redresses Patsy. But somebody, takes all the bedding off the bed, puts it in the washer and dryer. This is all on the night of the staging, and literally got away with it. And so, did she get away with it? Well, in effect, no. She did not get away with it.
To me, what this indictment says, and this is where I think, we don't know if there's ever going to be a case against anybody.
Hey, Stan Garnett was interesting this morning on the show. I'm trying to read into what he was saying. It was very good.
Yes, no, well, I think he's certainly approaching this with fresh eyes and very even-handedly, and you can't say that he's predisposed one way or the other. But what strikes me about this indictment, it tells us, if nothing else, that what was presented to this grand jury, there was enough there was enough of a sort of critical threshold of evidence that they felt this deserved to go to trial on the merits. And, obviously Alex Hunter didn't agree, but if you look at the totality of this stuff, that really does suggest, people should be looking, if they really want to try to figure this case out, and maybe it's hopeless to figure it out at this point, but there were obviously actual physical evidence that existed, however conflicting and ambiguous and tainted some of it might well be, that they felt could have taken a case forward. And I think that's worth, reporting. That's worth having out there.
Well, Alex Hunter, and then like I said, because I have to get a life, I read John and Patsy's book, and it triggered all of this, the Patsy's and John Ramseys of the world. Now, this is, and I read this to I read this to Stan Garnett on the air this morning, and Stan didn't know this. And so this is for Lynn Wood, who I'm sure is listening online. This is for Hal Haddon, who I'm sure is in his Mercedes listening. But this is from their book, Death of Innocence. And remember, Alan, I'm sure you do, that they couldn't get a straight publishing house to take the book. And suddenly, John and Patsy Ramsey become very devout Christians. And Patsy kind of toyed with it, but John really comes full scale. And they talk this Christian publishing house into publishing their book, Death of Innocence. Now, this is their book, page 357. The battered justice system had creaked and shuddered, but it had worked. We had not been indicted. Next sentence, people would have to finally see the jury's decision as our vindication. Talking about the grand jury. Next sentence, whatever time had been lost with the grand jury hearing must now be made up quickly. Page 359, same book. After looking at all the evidence, or lack of it, a grand jury of our peers had not indicted Patsy and me. It seemed the system had functioned as our Constitution had intended. We are truly grateful. Now, I asked Stan this morning on the radio show. I said, now, Alex Hunter had to know that, and so did Mary Keenan Lacey. Now, you would let these two murderers write this book claiming that your grand jury exonerated them, and you don't have the chutzpah to open your mouth and say no. Mary Keenan Lacey had to be able to. I asked Stan. Stan said, well, I was able to see it. That means he was being politically savvy and saying, well, then she could see it too. So it's Lady Justice wears a blindfold, and she's holding scales. If you put everything in one scale that says they did it, and everything in the other scale that is microscopic, that scale that says the Ramseys were guilty will drop like a rock.
Well, I don't know, again, I don't know who in particular could have done what. I do know that at different points in this prosecution, I know there was internal discussion, this has been reported different places, that if they could prove who wrote the ransom note, and they could prove there was prior sexual abuse.
Maybe.
Yeah, that they could go forward. Now, you can debate how far they got down that line, but it's pretty clear that there was lots of evidence of staging. I mean, there's no other way to describe all these bizarre things in the house. I mean, there's no other theory that makes any kind of sense.
No. I mean, that's why
there's certainly lots that points to similarities in that ransom note to Patsy more than just about anybody else.
Patsy wrote it.
And there's certainly among the team of forensic experts that reviewed autopsy results, there is at least a pretty strong conviction that there was some degree of prior sexual trauma. Now, all of that suggests an inside job. Mm-hmm. I don't know who or what. I don't have a particular axe in this. I don't have a conviction that so and so did such and such. But all of that would seem to suggest that there was at least a shot at taking this to trial. And you have to ask yourself, just where was the failure of will at some point?
But again, I don't think it has anything to do with that. I mean, I think there's other forces, other winds. I mean, how many times did Giuliani and others try for John Gotti before they got him? They tried O.J. and couldn't get him.
Yeah.
It's done all the time.
You only get one shot on a
That's
murder.
all right. That's all right.
Or you got double jeopardy.
Well, no, that's okay. I mean, new evidence brings up new trials. How many times they go for John Gotti? I mean, O.J. eventually gets cracked for just being the maniac that he is. But believe me, I think if people would have seen the evidence in an open courtroom, now maybe some fast talker like Hal Haddon or somebody else could have walked them out of there on a technicality. But they would have not. John Ramsey ran for office, for God's sake, as a Republican, which is pretty apt. And, they went around on these Christian shows and cried and did their crap, and they still got away with it. I say right now, I don't know, I forget the name of the woman that John married. I bet she's sleeping with one eye open right now. They literally got away with it. Michael Tracy rode that surf. Mary Keenan Lacey, just the worst. I mean, she really is horrible. Alex Hunter, I don't know, what motivates Alex Hunter. I don't know about these guys. I mean, I really don't. I don't know what motivates someone like Apollo Woodward, who the evidence is so overwhelming and so awesome, and she could walk away from that and come up with these bizarre things.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are going to be lots of different ways of spinning this story in the media, depending on who sees advantage in doing that or access or whatever they're seeking as a result of that. But, these prosecutors have a responsibility.
I understand.
That's entirely separate from what we in the press can speculate all this stuff. And I could kind of, try to see the situation from an Alex Hunter perspective, which is that if you only get one shot, you better make sure that you have at least a reasonable chance of conviction before you go forward.
Well, that could be, but what? I still think.
Well, I know that, when you start looking at the totalities, you look at the ransom note, you look at the fiber evidence that was developed, which to me is much more telling than these microscopic
Patsy Sweater
DNA things.
Patsy
This stuff on the inside of the duct tape.
Yeah, it's Patsy Sweater.
And to say that that's just sort of cross-contamination, I don't think that's a plausible explanation. But,
Alan,
there's going to be, that's the stuff that you would present to a jury and let them try to figure out, get the experts in to talk about this one way or another.
I've always said, you've never written and I think you could write the definitive book on Columbine. I think you could write the definitive book on this too. I don't know
about that. I don't know if there's anything definitive about what we know at this point.
I don't know. But
so much of it seems to me that it was so compromised in the first few days, and then further compromised by the way that these investigations were handled and the way the DAs backed away. That I just think we've got a real problem in ever getting this.
Well, I got a sense of Garnett this morning that the fat lady has not sung yet. So,
well, like I said, I think one thing we can be encouraged by with this indictment being finally confirmed is that there was a panel of jurors who looked at this evidence.
They said, yeah.
And they said, there's enough that we want to go forward.
Yep.
Maybe not with a first-degree murder charge, maybe with a felony child abuse resulting in death, but that it deserved a shot. Now, there was a disagreement with the DA about going forward at that point. But I'd sure like to know, where that case would have gone. I think it's interesting that Lynn Wood has said we should see all the evidence.
Well, but, Lynn Wood he's not threatening to sue anybody anymore, which, come on, Lynn Wood. I mean, Lynn Wood.
Well, but I'd say let's take him up on it.
But he knows damn well you can't. Look, the law is never going to allow that, Alan. He knows damn well what he's doing.
Okay, so
Lynn Wood is as slick as they come, and for Lynn Wood to start screaming, we should see it all, knowing damn well you can't. All you got to do is ask the people at the Rocky Flats grand jury. You can speak, but you can't see it, and so he knows that. So now he's screaming.
We still can't see the material that Lou Smith was allowed to walk
off. Of course, but he left. He walked away with it. I mean,
Michael Tracy had access to it.
Sure, he did.
But we weren't allowed to see it.
No, and Pasta Jalowski chased Lee Frank with a ball bat and never had to stand trial for it. You're talking about. That's why that song "Only in Boulder." I'm getting told I got a break. Stay or go. It's your choice.
I can stay around for.
All right, hang on. Alan Pendergast from Westward, kind enough to be with us. We were talking about the Ramseys and how an indictment becomes. This is Alan's latest piece. We have it up on our website, 710knus.com. But how it goes from their indictment to them being exonerated by the worst, and that would be Mary Keenan Lacey. When we broke away, we were talking about how all of this makes a twists and turns. And do you think it's done? Is it over?
Well, part of me wants to say I hope not, not because it's been such a spectacle over the years, but because you would really like to see someone get to the bottom of this. I mean, when all the tabloid stuff is stripped away and all the beauty queen hoopla and all that,
it's
this
is
really about a 6-year-old girl.
It's a little girl, yeah.
Really brutally murdered. I mean, this is not something that's sort of like an oops kind of death. This was this was really a brutal death. I mean, we're talking about a fractured skull, this garrote stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's just, and yet at the same time, elements of it that are clearly faked.
Oh, yeah.
And so to try to make any sense of this at all really means, kind of going back and figuring out the dynamics in that house, or who had access, who was in a position to do this. Mm-hmm. And I think it all got off track at some point, I mean, with this embrace of this intruder theory, which really came out of thin air, just like we've, this microscopic DNA is now been, conjured into an intruder.
There was no.
Well,
intruder.
I think the theories around that. Remember the stun gun?
Oh, sure. And there was no stun gun.
Yeah, I mean, there's. I think it's pretty well disproven. Lou Schmidt hung his whole intruder theory on this.
Lou Schmidt.
And it doesn't work. You can't.
Lou Schmidt prayed in the side yard on his knees with the Ramseys.
Yeah.
Now that's hardly.
And went in and out. You remember him doing on 48 Hours.
All of it.
Right in the window to show how this could happen.
All of it.
It's just.
All of it.
So
Lou Schmidt after.
And the media over the years has been, to me, surprisingly, a passive receiver of a lot of nutty theories.
But some of the outlets, I mean, we stood tall, I thought, and still do. But like I said, Channel 9, the Ramsey Mountain News, Lisa with the two last names. I give you a list of people that were just horrible. I mean, just awful. Just, I don't know what purpose they served, except to, they were the people, I say, in Camp Ramsey. And remember, John and they actually hired PR guys. They had a PR firm.
Oh, sure, and they played the media like a drum. And there was. I mean, it really does say something about the dark side of our profession, the way people angled for access.
The fact that you use the word profession,
for exclusivity or supposed exclusivity would in fact kind of compromise their ability to be objective about it.
I'll tell you what. With you, I use the word profession. With them, I would not. They were butchers. You know who I want to get on the show and talk about a name from the past, and I'm going to chase it today a little bit. Chuck Green. Remember?
I would be very interesting to know what Chuck thought about it.
Yeah, what Chuck thinks about this. And, there were some people, and there was always a backstory that what happened in a restaurant or in a bar or going to meet somebody. Or I was mentioning J.T. Colfax and just all these strange people, Santa Claus McReynolds, and they just came out of nowhere. And as the story continued, it continued. And, and the destruction of the careers of some great people in law enforcement. And the dance that these two, this kabuki that John and Patsy performed, and standing there on New Year's Eve to hold your babies close, there's a killer out there. And finally that idiot mayor up there finally came out and said, well, there's no killer up here. And you want to say, hey, Dick Tracy, where'd you park your squad car? I mean, they were just so horrible.
I mean, I think what you were talking about with Patricia earlier is quite right, that this became a kind of study in the strangeness of Boulder.
Oh, man.
And, sort of the alternate universe aspect of Boulder.
And I think Schiller or Brennan aptly names the book, because they were a perfect place, and it could not happen up there because Boulder is perfect, and that's why they blew it. And like I said, I remember going up there with Ann Louise Bardak from Vanity Fair, which is a whole other story. Ann Louise and I parking, and these so-called very proper, upper-class, politically correct, progressive Boulderites coming out of their houses and screaming at us.
Ruining the neighborhood.
Well, we were called effing bloodsuckers in front of their little children, and I thought,
there goes the neighborhood.
There goes the hood. That's right.
Yeah.
Great job. I love you. I'll talk to you. Thank you, Alan, very much.
Sure. Take care.
We got some things to do, but this guy's waited. Hey, Tom, you're on a radio show. Good morning. You waited.
Yeah, Pete, I was wondering, I'm obviously I'm not a lawyer, but maybe you know the answer to this or can get it. I was under the impression that a DA had the prerogative to decide whether he had enough evidence to convene a grand jury. But
remember, he didn't. This was the governor. The governor forced the grand jury, not Alex.
Yes. Okay, but either way, I was under the impression, at least, that once a grand jury is convened and they issue a bill of indictment, that the DA had to bring it to trial.
No.
He didn't have the option. No, that's not the case. Okay.
No, my understanding, and this is because I've never been in a grand jury, so I don't know, but I've read about them. And you remember, I know this is my friend Tom, and because we've talked so much about Marilyn Monroe, the Kennedy thing's coming back. So they convene a grand jury in Chicago, and not Marilyn Monroe, but Phyllis McGuire, who was the lover of Sam Giancana, and she gets subpoenaed to go to the grand jury, and she goes, and Sam has no choice, and they're after that Tony Arcardo, the Big Tuna, and all those guys. And when you go before a grand jury, organized crime, if you don't want to talk, that's fine, but you go to jail. And and the grand jury in Boulder, remember, John and Patsy stayed as far away from that grand jury as they could. So did, remember, Crazy Aunt Pam and all these people who said, we can't wait to get in front of a grand jury. Well, guess what? They never showed. And you know what? I'm not sure Alex called them. Alex Hunter, sort of like end of summer. What are you going to say, right?
But you're pretty sure that if there is a bill of indictment out of
there was two true bills.
The DA still has an option not to go to trial with it?
Best of my knowledge.
Because
they indicted number 4 and number 7 were indictments.
Yeah, well, I thought the DA had to move on that. But
no.
His options ended by convening the grand jury.
But remember,
I
don't think Alex Hunter wanted a grand jury, and it was forced on him. And there was Michael Caine and all. All these great guys got involved in this thing. And, they dead bang hand him. Tell me, I got a break. All right, we have one man who's been waiting. Mark, we got about maybe 3 minutes. Good morning.
Okay, that's good. Briefly, I say the best thing that could happen to help Boulder law enforcement advance the case would be to answer the question publicly, and that, of course, is who did what between John and Patsy. I think I have that answer. Patsy did the whole thing, did it deliberately. No one else was involved, and there was no staging for police. Everything that was done by Patsy for Patsy. It's part of a psychotic fantasy. And the only person's standards that had to be met was Patsy. It was all done for her, not to deceive the police.
But let's assume for a second, and I don't believe that, but let's assume for a second you're right. Mark, what was the purpose?
Well, the explanation of that is kind of complex.
No, just give me. If she does all this, and there has to be, maybe the cops always call it motive. What's her motive?
In true psychotic fashion, she did things to the object, which was John Bonet, to participate in what was going on in her mind, and that was a fantasy. The simplest way to put it, and it's not really well done, is to say Patsy put John Bonet in heaven in order to have that fantasy about herself that she would be in heaven with her daughter, with a god.
Who knows? I mean, somebody once said to me years ago, what is it that I wanted to really know about this story?
Well, there are some things that I could tell you if I had more time that explains what was done in a consistent manner. The accident cover-up theory does not explain.
I just told people that I just wanted to know what her dreams were, because every night the devil must have come and danced in Patsy's dreams.
And her dreams showed up in what was done that night.
That's amazing. You're a good man, Mark. Thanks, brother.